Good day, everyone. This is my presentation on By Love Possessed by Lorna Goodison. I'd like to start us off with the words of Maya Angelou, and I quote, I must undertake to love myself and to respect as though my very life depends upon self-love and self-respect. End of quote. The short stories on love in By Love Possessed by Jamaican poet and writer Lorna Goodison encapsulate the thoughts of Angelo. For Goodison, love should not conflict the woman and make her vulnerable to the manipulative gestures of patriarchy. While Goodison examines a number of social issues, particularly those that have to do with gender, the focus of my presentation is how patriarchy constructs the woman in a manner of exploiting her human traits. In this text, Goodison also explores the patriarchal manipulation of the humanness of women towards the goal of exploiting them and restricting them to the place of the second sex. I argue that Goodison uses her narrative to both illustrate how patriarchal constructs of the woman are destructive and dehumanizing, as well as to point women to ways in which they might be able to liberate themselves from these stereotypes. I have chosen for consideration the following stories: By Love Possessed, Jamaica Hope, and Help Wait. So let's dive into them. First, let's have a look at By Love Possessed. This is actually the title story of this collection. And here is a brief summary. Dottie is a tall and skinny and quote unquote dry up woman who finds love with a young, handsome man after having devoted her life to being a single woman. When her lover abruptly leaves her due to his manly pride, Dottie is hopeful that he will return, but soon realizes that he never will. In the end, she lets go of all the other things that once gave her pleasure, such as her perfect yard. Now, let's look at the analysis of this. Now, in this short story, as the title suggests, Dottie becomes possessed or mystified by what she perceives to be love. But in actuality, this love is really just an illusion. Dottie's relationship is deeply rooted in patriarchy and gender inequality. She has indeed been mystified. It is because women have been historically conditioned to seeing relationships and eventual marriage as a central part of their identity. Dottie is unable to recognize that she is being exploited. It is because she has been conditioned to seeing subjecting herself to the rulership of the man as a prerequisite of being a woman. It is because of this, right? She is unable to experience a genuine romantic relationship. Frenchie recognizes this in Dottie and plays on the stereotype that black women are always overly empathetic, and sacrificial towards the man. So, let's go into a few examples to really see this in action in this story. I'm going to read a few quotes from this text. Dottie always experienced a thrill when he said that it was a signal of ownership. The slight menace in his voice was exciting. It gave her the right to say, Frenchie vexed whenever I come home late. Next quote. She would hurry to fix his dinner and set it on the table before him. She hardly ever ate with him, but sat at the table watching him eat. Every day Frenchie eat a Sunday dinner, Winston would say. It was true. Dottie cooked only the best for Frenchie. He ate rice and peas at least 3 times per week, unlike everybody else who only ate it on Sundays. Dottie would leave the peas soaking overnight and half boil them in the morning so that it could finish cooking quickly when she hurried home in the evenings. He also had beef steak at least twice a week and quality fish and chicken the rest of the week. So, from these examples, we clearly see just how much Dottie does for Frenchie, right? And I have some visual representations of what this really looks like, in the way Dottie goes above and beyond for Frenchie, right? Just juggling all of these chores, juggling all of these responsibilities, the cooking, the cleaning, and that goes back to what I was speaking about with the gender inequality. That idea that the woman has to be responsible for all aspects of the household, the cooking, the cleaning, and the tending to and caring for the man, right? We see this in full effect here with Dottie, where she has completely assumed that responsibility. It's as if that's her obligation to the man, right? Um, we see that taking place there, where she is subjecting herself basically to Frenchie. Now, on the flip side, let's look at a few quotes with what Frenchie has done or has contributed to their relationship. First quote: Frenchie did not walk. She mind him. Dottie bowed down to the very drawers that Frenchie wear. Not even a kerchief the man could buy for himself. Frenchie loved rum, and rum loved him. As a matter of fact, every day he spent a good 8 hours like a man going to walk in Mr. Percy's bar at the corner. So clearly we see a very sharp contrast between what Dottie does for Frenchie and what Frenchie does for her, right? So we saw the visual representations of what Dottie would look like with all that she does. And on the flip side, this is Frenchie, basically every single day, relaxing, lounging about the house or out at the bar drinking, right? So again, it goes back to the inequality there clearly. And so I want to read two final quotes that I find to be quite significant. When Dottie hurried in through the door that evening, this is now to the end of the story where Frenchie storms off. When Dottie hurried through the door that evening, saying breathlessly, "Papa, I come," she was met with the following sight. Frenchie standing at the door of her front room with her best soup tureen in one hand and four of her best gold-rimmed tumblers stacked inside each other in the other hand. And as soon as he saw her, he flung them into the streets. He went back inside and emerged with more of the precious things from her china cabinet, and he flung them into the street, where they broke with a rich, full sound on the asphalt. She would have forgiven him for breaking her precious things. She would like to have been able to tell the story of how bad her man was, and about the day he broke everything in her china cabinet and boxed her down the steps. But he was gone. So what was the point? Now this is a really significant passage because it shows, even in the clear, direct act of Frenchie hurting her by taking the items that he knew were precious to her, that were valuable to her, that were important to her, and destroying them, right? Even after him causing so much hurt to her, she was still willing even then to take him back. And it goes back to what we were discussing just previously with how, the stereotypical view of the woman always being sacrificial, always being overly forgiving for the black man, no matter what he does, he can go out and cheat, he can go out and do all of these things and be hurtful. And at the end of the day, the black woman is always forgiving. And we see how Dottie clearly fits into this stereotype. And I think there is a significance as well with this passage in the way um, the possessions are being described and how they're being broken. Because for me, right, these precious items, these glass items, come to symbolize or represent Frenchie and their relationship. Because for Dati, as we saw earlier in the previous quotes, right, Frenchie was a handsome man. So for Dati, he basically embodied or symbolized these same precious possessions that she had in her china cabinet, you know. And these things, of course, were just materialistic, you know. A precious a precious item like that, or vase in her cabinet, you know, they're physically beautiful, right? But they're just materialistic at the end of the day. And you know, the way that she would polish it off, that comes to represent her relationship with Frenchie. Like, he was just it was just a superficial relationship, right? Just a materialistic on the surface, no real depth to their relationship. Because in the end, she was just constantly polishing him off, keeping him clean and neat in the way she would overwork herself to cook and clean and provide, you know. But in the end, it wasn't a genuine relationship, and we see that in the way he leaves, right? So I think this passage is really important in highlighting that. So the next story we're going to look at is Jamaica Hope. Now, Jamaica Hope describes a 10-year relationship that ends with a long sought after engagement. This happens when Alfonso finally agrees to marry Leela after Alfonso takes care of his cousin after a stroke. Now, in comparison to the previous story we just looked at, by Love Possessed, one would think from this summary that, hey, we have a story with a more positive ending, right? As opposed to what happened with Dati. But as we seek to dive a little bit deeper, we'll discover that it is not actually the happily ever after ending you think it would be, right? Even though the story appears to end with a happily ever after, it is in fact a superficial happy ending. In this story, Goodison is demonstrating how black women tend to see marriage as a kind of redemption. However, this is false, as marriage is a patriarchal construction. What she does with this story is also highlight the belief that marriage and childbearing are central to womanhood, and if a woman cannot fulfill those requirements, she has failed as a human being. So here in this story, similarly to Dati, we see yet another black woman falling into this stereotype, right? Feeling pressured by the societal expectations. So let's look at a few quotes, right? Leela wants her ring. She wants to feel her left hand grow heavy with gold. She wants her ring finger to get proud and stick out from the other fingers on her hand. She wants to use her beringed left hand to languidly wipe her eyes, to wave at her friends, to cover her mouth when she yawns. She wants to get to sit in the front seat beside the driver and tap out a triumphant, ringing, golden rhythm with her wedding band on the solid frame of a moving vehicle. So in this first quote here, we really see clearly a lot of the reasons behind why Leela wants to get married, and all of these things, as you can see, are for show. It's to give off a certain impression or a certain image to the rest of society, right? Wanting people to notice her as she's traveling on a bus, you know, wherever she is and whatever she's doing during her day. So it's external reasons, right? To again sort of give off a certain impression to society that she's married, because that is what women are expected to do. Second quote: one of the main reasons that Leela wants to get married is because of something that she heard that Sharnetta said. Somebody had asked Sharnetta what she was doing with Alfonso. If she didn't know that Leela and Alfonso were practically married, and Sharnetta said that Leela had no talk because she had no ring. And again, so we see here the pressure now, right? Externally from society, that no matter how solid a relationship may be between two persons, if you don't have the ring, then it it doesn't matter, you know. Um, and so again, we see, as we spoke about previously, this belief that this is so central and essential to a woman's being, that without it, the relationship is just not legitimate. Um, Final quote: Leela, it's not that I don't want to be married to you. It's just that, Leela, I don't believe I don't love you. It's just that sometimes I can't understand what's happening to me. I was always a strong man, but these days I don't understand why I'm feeling so. The girl from town handled me like a boy over the booth, and I have to just take it because I want my money. And now you come with this married business, Leela. You is my woman. Why we can't just go on cool same way? So here in this quote, we are hearing now from Alfonso. And this quote is significant in that it shows us the way Alfonso is changing, right? As he's realizing he is not the man he used to be. As we see here, it says, I was always a strong man, but these days he's feeling different. Because as he's getting older, he's not going to be as strong, you know. He's not going to have the same exact qualities he would have had when he was younger. So as he's getting older now, we see that he's noticing these changes. And this is important in his decision to eventually marry Leela. And another thing that cements this is when his cousin has a stroke. So we kind of see him already thinking, or this kind of foreshadows when he would eventually start to think even more about his own mortality. We kind of see that a little bit here in this passage. He's noticing that he's getting older, and he would need to settle down at this point in time. So Goodison's treatment of marriage isn't positive here. And let me just say that it isn't to say that Goodison is saying that marriage is necessarily, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? But we know inherently it is a patriarchal construct. So it just really depends on a lot of different reasons, like why you want to get married. So, but the treatment of marriage in this case isn't a positive one. Alfonso only proposes to Leela when he is forced to reflect upon his own mortality. He turns to Leela to take care of him when he has nothing left in his life to look forward to. Leela has been conditioned to using a wedding ring on her finger to determine her self-worth. So that's that for that second story. We're getting now into our final story, Helpmate. Now in Helpmate, an accomplished woman must bear the burden of an old lover's affections when he returns from abroad with his Irish wife. In this story, we see the full rites of passage of empowerment for Black women, as well as the dysfunctional male journey for love. So in the previous two stories that we looked at, we see the way women fall into the stereotype of the Black woman being sacrificial, the Black woman being overly empathetic, But in this case, in this story, it's an excellent example and a perfect way to conclude this presentation, right? An excellent example of how a black woman can liberate herself, can escape these stereotypes. So the protagonist moves through three phases to arrive at this point of liberation. Firstly, she's mystified, like the other characters we see, Dati and Leela. She's mystified or possessed by love and caught up in the illusion created by the dysfunctional black man. Two, she recognizes she has a right to her own journey. And finally, she encounters him as a married man. So, phase one. In phase one, she's mystified or possessed by love, what she perceives to be love. She's his queen, he's her king. However, in this love later proves to be an illusion by the black man. And this is reflected in the paradox presented when he says to her, when he says to her, black is beautiful. And when I talk about him, of course, I'm referring to the old love, Nathan. So, in the beginning, when they were still together, she is caught up in this illusion. And it's a paradox here. We see the paradox when he says black is beautiful, right? So, the paradox is that while she is light-skinned, we come to find out that she's not light enough for him, right? He has her to believe that she is, right? That black is beautiful and they'll always be together. But we come to discover that she's not light enough when he completely goes on to marrying a white woman. And then even after marrying this white woman, he has the audacity to seek sympathy from her. Let's go on to the second phase. In this second phase, the woman recognizes she has a right to her own journey. In his journey, Nathan, in his own movement, he has his own movement when he decides to leave Jamaica for school. When he asks her to come with him, it is so that she can be a part of what he wants to do with her life, with his life. So he invites her to be a part of his journey, his movement, his decisions. This journey would not have been about herself, but as relative to him or in relation to him. Going back to what I said in the beginning about being the second sex, when everything is done in relation to the man, right? So thus, in deciding to stay in Jamaica, she's making a statement here. She's asserting her right to her own story. So while he's away, she still expects that he would come back and marry her as they had discussed. But instead, he returns with a wife. So in this final phase, she encounters Nathan as a married man. He has the audacity to seek sympathy from her because he married a white woman. He tries to manipulate her so-called good nature. Again, the stereotypical view of the black woman as being empathetic and sacrificial of the man. In other words, she is put on trial. She is basically being put to the test. Now, in the first trial, she fails miserably when she agrees to take his wife Deidre shopping. In this instance, she lives up to the stereotype, as Leela and Dati do. She lives up to the stereotype who is ever forgiving to the black man. This continues when Nathan's mom passes and she takes control of planning her funeral. During the course of the funeral, however, when he publicly humiliates her by referring to her as a friend, she is finally able to break free of the syndrome. She's finally able to break free from this spell, from being mystified. She affirms herself by leaving the funeral early. What is significant is that she not only detaches herself from Nathan, but also from her doctor boyfriend when she decides not to marry him. She realizes that neither will fulfill her. In recognizing what's wrong with Nathan, she recognizes the limitations of the doctor. She doesn't need a man to be fulfilled. This realization completes her rite of passage. She starts off as a victim of patriarchal control, where Nathan manipulates her by playing on her soft spots. But by the end, she is able to move to a stage of liberation. What is also noteworthy about this story is that the protagonist has no children of her own. Consequently, the story removes the stereotype that she must be married with children. With this, Goodison successfully drives home the point that a woman doesn't need any of these things to be happy, fulfilled, and liberated. So, in conclusion, on one level, Goodison shows how crippling patriarchal constructs are, and the efforts made by men to manipulate and entice women to maintain these stereotypes. But at the same time, she also shows that there is an opening through which women can get rid of these stereotypes and liberate themselves from patriarchy. And we see that in the final story, Helpmeet. For Goodison, love should be above everything. For Goodison, love should above everything be a process through which the woman can heal herself and rid herself of the negative representations of womanhood that subject the woman to a life of servitude in the institution of marriage, or to see herself as a failure if she does not produce offspring. And to conclude this presentation, I want to just circle back to the quote that I used in the very beginning of the presentation. And that is, I must undertake to love myself and respect as though my very life depends upon self-love and self-respect. Thank you.